In the depths of space, where alien empires measure their worth by the size of their weapons and the fear they inspire, humanity was considered nothing more than a cosmic joke. The Galactic Council's records listed Earth as species classification, harmless, military threat level, negligible, recommended action, ignore. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they failed to understand was that humans didn't build the biggest guns or the most terrifying weapons. Instead, they built something far more dangerous: the ability to turn anything into a weapon and the stubborn refusal to know when they were beaten. When backed into a corner, humans didn't surrender, they got creative. Commander Zora-Chun was about to teach the entire galaxy this lesson, one perfectly placed shot at a time. The trading post on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices, mechanical hums, and the distinct smell of recycled air mixed with exotic spices. Commander Zora-Chun kept her head down as she navigated through the crowd, her worn Earth Navy uniform drawing the occasional curious glance from passing traders. At 5'6" with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she looked unremarkable among the towering Krillians and the multi-armed Zenthri merchants. She was exactly where she needed to be. The weapon shop sat tucked between a Glorthian food vendor and a spare parts dealer, its neon sign flickering in 3 different alien languages. Zara pushed through the door, triggering a soft chime that seemed to echo longer than it should. The proprietor, a slug-like Malarian with 4 eye stalks, glanced up from his work cleaning a massive energy rifle. "Human," the creature said, his voice dripping through a translation device that made him sound perpetually bored. "What brings your kind to my establishment? Looking for something to protect yourself with? I have some lovely personal defense weapons that even your weak species could handle." Zara approached the counter slowly, her eyes scanning the impressive array of weapons mounted on the walls. Plasma rifles that could melt through starship hulls, molecular disruptors that could reduce a target to component atoms, and energy weapons that could level city blocks. Each one represented the pinnacle of their respective species' military technology. "Actually," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I'm looking for something specific. I heard you might have some vintage Earth weapons. Projectile-based systems." The Malarian's eye stalks swiveled to focus on her, confusion evident in his expression. "Projectile weapons? You mean those primitive chemical propulsion devices your species used before you discovered energy manipulation? Why would you want such outdated technology?" Zara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Call it nostalgia." The shopkeeper slithered toward a dusty corner of his shop, muttering something about foolish humans and their attachment to inferior technology. He returned with a locked case containing 3 weapons that looked ancient compared to the gleaming energy weapons surrounding them. A bolt-action rifle, a semi-automatic pistol, and something that made Zara's heart race with excitement. "This is all I have," the Malarian said, setting the case on the counter. "Found them on a derelict human transport ship. The previous owner claimed they were antiques from your homeworld. Completely useless in modern combat, of course. Any energy shield can stop these primitive projectiles." Zara's fingers traced the outline of the 3rd weapon through the transparent aluminum case. It was an M24 SWS sniper rifle, its scope and bipod still intact despite obvious signs of age. She trained on these weapons during her early years at the Academy, back when Earth was still considered too primitive to receive modern Galactic Council technology. "How much for the rifle?" she asked. The Malarian's laugh was a wet, bubbling sound. "For that relic? 500 credits. Though I should warn you, acquiring ammunition for such primitive weapons is nearly impossible in civilized space." Zara transferred the credits without hesitation, watching as the Malarian's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. As she lifted the case, he leaned forward, his curiosity getting the better of his business sense. "If you don't mind me asking," he said, "why would a human military officer want such an obsolete weapon? Surely your people have access to proper energy weapons now." Zara paused at the door, the case tucked securely under her arm. "Because sometimes the old ways are the best ways. And sometimes, What looks obsolete to one species is perfectly effective against another. She left the shopkeeper puzzling over her words as she made her way back through the station's corridors. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, even through the case. During her academy days, she'd spent countless hours on the range, learning to account for wind, gravity, and the subtle mathematics of ballistic trajectories. Skills that were considered quaint and outdated in an age of energy weapons and guided projectiles. Her destination was Docking Bay 7, where the U.S. Determination waited. The ship was a Terran Confederation light cruiser, one of the newer vessels that Earth had been permitted to build after joining the Galactic Council. Its sleek lines and advanced technology were impressive by human standards, though it was still considered barely adequate by the Council's measure. Captain Marcus Webb was waiting for her in the cargo bay, his weathered face creased with worry. At 52, Webb was old enough to remember when humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council, and experienced enough to understand the precarious nature of Earth's position in galactic politics. "Tell me you found what we're looking for," Webb said, eyeing the case in Zara's arms. "Better than I hoped," she replied, setting the case on a nearby crate and opening it. Webb's eyes widened as he saw the rifle. "A 24 SWS? Where did you find this?" "Malarian dealer in the Market District. He thought it was worthless." Zara lifted the rifle carefully, checking its condition with practiced efficiency. The barrel's in good shape, scope mounts are solid, and the action feels smooth. "Give me some time with the machine shop, and I can manufacture the ammunition we need." Webb nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Zara, you know what we're walking into. The hegemony has ships that could vaporize us before we get within 1,000 kilometers. Their shields can stop anything in our arsenal." The Krillian hegemony had been flexing their military might throughout the Outer Rim for months, systematically absorbing smaller systems and challenging anyone who opposed them. Their ships were massive, their weapons devastating, and their attitude toward other species was somewhere between condescending and openly hostile. When they'd moved to claim the mineral-rich Vega system, the Galactic Council had responded with diplomatic protests and economic sanctions. The hegemony's response had been to laugh. "Their shields can stop energy weapons," Zara corrected, running her hand along the rifle stock. "Plasma, particle beams, molecular disruptors. All the modern weapons that everyone considers essential for space combat." Webb's eyes lit up with understanding. "But physical projectiles are so primitive that their shield systems aren't designed to stop them. A chunk of lead traveling at 800 meters per second is invisible to sensors calibrated to detect energy signatures." Zara's smile was predatory now. They've spent so long fighting advanced civilizations that they've forgotten how to deal with simple physics. The plan forming in Webb's mind was audacious to the point of insanity. The Determination would have to get close enough to the hegemony fleet for Zara to take her shot, which meant bypassing some of the most advanced detection and defense systems in known space. It meant relying on outdated technology and human ingenuity against an enemy that outgunned them by orders of magnitude. It was exactly the kind of plan that had gotten humanity noticed by the Galactic Council in the first place. The Council's intelligence reports show that War Master Krex commands their fleet personally, Webb said. He's aboard the flagship Inevitable Victory, probably safe behind multiple layers of shielding and surrounded by escort vessels. Zara's fingers found the rifle's trigger, and she sighted down the barrel toward the far wall of the cargo bay. "Then, we'll have to get creative about how we approach this. The hegemony expects conventional tactics from a conventional enemy. They're not prepared for a species that learned warfare by fighting itself for thousands of years." As word of their mission spread through the ship, Zara found herself the subject of curious stares from the crew. Some looked at her with something approaching awe, others with concern that bordered on fear. The idea of using ancient ballistic weapons against advanced alien technology seemed either brilliant or completely insane, with very little middle ground. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the ship's communications officer, found Zara in the armory several hours later. The commander was working at a reloading bench, carefully crafting ammunition for her rifle using materials she'd scrounged from the ship's inventory. "Ma'am," Kim said hesitantly, "the crew's been talking. Some of them think this plan is impossible." Zara didn't look up from her work, measuring powder charges with microscopic precision. "What do you think, Lieutenant?" Kim was quiet for a long moment, watching as Zara seated a bullet in a brass casing with the care of surgeon. "I think the hegemony's about to learn why humans spent so much of our history fighting each other. We got good at finding weaknesses that nobody else would think to exploit." "Exactly." Zara held up a completed round, examining it in the armory's harsh lighting. "Every species in the galaxy measures military strength by energy output and shield capacity. They've forgotten that warfare isn't just about having the biggest weapons. Sometimes it's about having the right weapon for the job." The ammunition manufacturing process was painstaking work. Each bullet had to be perfectly balanced, each powder charge precisely measured. Too little propellant, and the projectile wouldn't have the velocity to penetrate. Too much, and the rifle's action might fail at a critical moment. Zara worked through the night, crafting each round with the attention to detail that had made her one of Earth's finest marksmen. By morning, she had 50 perfectly crafted rounds loaded into magazines. It was more than she would need for any single engagement, but enough to account for multiple targets and the possibility of misses. As she cleaned her equipment, Webb entered the armory with a concerned expression. "We've received new intelligence from council sources," he said. "The hegemony fleet is larger than we thought. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 escorts, and the flagship. They're not just claiming the Vegas system. They're establishing a permanent forward base." Zara nodded, unsurprised. The Krillian hegemony had been expanding their territory steadily for decades, testing the resolve of the Galactic Council with each new acquisition. The Council's response had always been the same: diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, and strongly worded statements that accomplished nothing. "Any word on War Master Krex's location?" "Intelligence confirms he's aboard the inevitable Victory, coordinating the operation personally. The flagship's heavily shielded and surrounded by a defensive screen of escorts." Webb paused, his expression grim. "Zara, even with your plan, getting close enough for a clear shot seems impossible." Zara finished cleaning her rifle and stood, the weapon cradled in her arms like a familiar friend. "Captain, what's the one thing every military commander in the galaxy fears most?" Webb considered the question. "Assassination. Close, but not quite right. They fear being outmaneuvered by an enemy they underestimated." Zara's eyes were bright with anticipation. The hegemony's strength comes from their certainty that they're technologically superior to everyone else. They don't take proper precautions against threats they don't consider credible. As the determination prepared to depart Kepler's station, word of their mission began to spread through the station's communication networks. By the time they cleared the docking clamps, half the galaxy seemed to know that a single human ship was heading to confront the entire hegemony fleet. The reactions were predictably mixed. Some species expressed admiration for human courage. Others dismissed it as suicidal bravado. The Centauri Collective issued a statement calling the mission a noble but futile gesture. The Andromedan Trade Union offered to provide funeral services at a substantial discount. The Krillian hegemony's response was more direct. War Master Krex himself appeared on galactic news networks, his massive form dominating the screen as he addressed what he clearly considered an amusing development. "The humans send a single ship against our fleet?" His voice was a deep rumble that spoke of barely contained violence. "How touching. Perhaps we should prepare a special ceremony to honor their sacrifice. It has been too long since we've had proper entertainment." The news feed cut to footage of the hegemony fleet, dozens of warships arranged in perfect formation around the massive bulk of the inevitable Victory. Each vessel was a monument to Krillian military engineering, bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to rubble and shields that had never been penetrated in combat. Against this force, the determination looked like a minnow challenging a school of sharks. But Zara-chun had learned something during her years of studying military history. The biggest mistake any commander could make was underestimating their enemy. As she sat in her quarters, cleaning her rifle one final time before combat, she reflected on the countless battles throughout human history where superior technology had been defeated by superior tactics. The Krillians were about to learn that lesson firsthand. Outside her viewport, the stars wheeled slowly past as the determination accelerated toward its destiny. In 36 hours, they would drop out of hyperspace in a Vega system and face the most powerful fleet the hegemony had ever assembled. Zara loaded her rifle with steady hands, chambering the first round with a soft metallic click that echoed in the quiet of her quarters. Somewhere out there, War Master Krex was probably enjoying his evening meal, confident that tomorrow would bring him another easy victory against an inferior opponent. He was about to discover that humans had their own definition of impossible. The Vega system spread out before them like a three-dimensional chessboard where every piece belonged to the enemy. The determination sensors painted a tactical display that would have made any reasonable commander order an immediate retreat. 12 Krillian heavy cruisers hung in space like sleeping giants, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Around them, 30 escort vessels maintained perfect formation, their patrol patterns creating an impenetrable web of overlapping sensor coverage and weapons ranges. At the center of it all, the inevitable victory dominated the battlefield like a metallic mountain. The flagship stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its massive bulk housing enough weapons to fight an entire fleet single-handedly. Intelligence reports suggested it carried a crew of over 10,000, supported by automated defense systems that could track and eliminate hundreds of targets simultaneously. Captain Webb stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the tactical display. The silence stretched uncomfortably as his officers waited for orders that seemed increasingly impossible to give. How do you attack a force that outguns you by a factor of 50? Captain, Lieutenant Kim's voice was carefully controlled. We're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship. It's marked as priority communication. Webb nodded grimly. Put it through. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of War Master Krex. The Krillian commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian features set in what might have been amusement. Behind him, the bridge of the inevitable victory stretched away in both directions, filled with dozens of officers moving with military precision. So, Krex's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The famous human ship arrives at last. I confess, I am curious about your intentions. Surely you do not mean to challenge our claim to this system with a single vessel. Webb stepped forward, projecting calm confidence he didn't feel. War Master Krex, I am Captain Marcus Webb of the Terran Confederation ship Determination. We're here on behalf of the Galactic Council to request your immediate withdrawal from vegan space. Krex's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. Request. How delightfully naive. Captain Webb, your species has been a member of the Galactic Council for what, 2 decades? In that time, you have contributed nothing of significance to galactic civilization. Your technology is primitive, your military laughably weak, and your diplomatic influence non-existent. The Krillian commander gestured dismissively at something off-screen. Yet here you stand, demanding that the hegemony abandon a perfectly legitimate expansion into unclaimed territory. Tell me, Captain, what exactly do you think you can do to enforce this request? Webb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. What we can do, War Master, is remind you that the Galactic Council's authority extends throughout this sector. Your actions here constitute a clear violation of established territorial agreements. The Council, Krex sneered, a collection of aging species clinging to outdated ideologies about cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The galaxy belongs to the strong, Captain Webb, not to those who hide behind bureaucratic proclamations. Behind the War Master, a junior officer approached and whispered something in his ear. Krex's expression shifted to one of genuine amusement as he nodded and waved the subordinate away. How interesting, he said, turning back to face Webb. My tactical officers inform me that your ship carries only standard council-approved weaponry. Plasma cannons, particle beam arrays, photon torpedoes. Nothing we haven't seen 1,000 times before. His eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. Nothing our shields cannot easily deflect. Webb felt sweat gathering at the back of his neck, but he maintained his diplomatic posture. War Master, the Council's response to your aggression here will have consequences that extend far beyond this single system. Will it? Krex moved closer to his communication pickup, his massive form filling the screen. Let me explain something about consequences, little human. In exactly 1 hour, my fleet will begin bombardment of the 3 inhabited worlds in this system. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Your council may protest, but they will do nothing that matters. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge of the determination in tense silence. Webb turned to face his crew, seeing his own doubts reflected in their expressions. They were one ship against an entire fleet, carrying weapons that the enemy's shields could easily stop. Except for one. Zara Chun emerged from a lift carrying her rifle case and a small pack of equipment. She had changed from her standard uniform into a black tactical suit that would help her blend into shadows. Her face was calm, almost serene, as she approached the command center. "Captain," she said quietly, "it's time." Webb nodded and activated the ship's internal communication system. "All stations, this is the captain. We are now beginning combat operations against the Hegemony fleet. I want everyone to understand what we're attempting here today." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What we're doing has never been tried before in modern space combat. We're going to rely on tactics that predate energy weapons, shield technology, and most of the military doctrine taught in council academies. We're going back to basics." Zara checked her equipment one final time as Webb continued his address to the crew. Her rifle was loaded and ready, the scope zeroed for vacuum conditions. In her pack, she carried range-finding equipment, environmental sensors, and 49 additional rounds of ammunition. "The plan is simple," Webb announced. "We're going to get Commander Chun close enough to the enemy flagship for her to take a shot at their commander. One shot, one kill, using a weapon so primitive that their defenses won't even recognize it as a threat." The audacity of the plan hung in the air like a physical presence. They were going to attempt an assassination using a chemical-propelled projectile weapon against a target protected by energy shields that could stop starship weapons. "Lieutenant Kim," Webb ordered, "begin evasive approach pattern Delta 7. Navigation, plot a course that keeps us in the sensor shadows of those asteroids for as long as possible. Engineering, I want everything we have available to the engines and maneuvering thrusters." The determination began its approach like a predator stalking prey through tall grass. The ship's advanced stealth systems, originally designed for reconnaissance missions, dampened their energy signature to barely detectable levels. They moved slowly, using the system's asteroid belt to mask their position as they closed the distance to the enemy fleet. Zara made her way to the ship's observation deck, where the crew had removed several hull plates to give her a clear field of fire. The improvised sniper's nest was crude but functional, with magnetic clamps to secure her position and a targeting computer jury-rigged to work with her optical scope. The range to target was enormous by terrestrial standards. Nearly 15 kilometers of hard vacuum separated the determination from the inevitable victory. At that distance, gravity would be negligible, but she would have to account for the movement of both ships, the slight rotation of the enemy vessel, and a dozen other variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. "Chun to bridge," she spoke into her comm unit. "In position and ready. I have visual on the target." Through her scope, the enemy flagship filled her view like a moving city. She could see the details of its hull, plating, the glow of active shield generators, and the small figures of crew members visible through viewport transparency. Somewhere in that massive structure, War Master Krex was probably preparing for the bombardment of innocent worlds. "Zara," Webb's voice came through clearly, We're picking up increased activity in their escort pattern. I think they detected us. She adjusted her scope's magnification, searching for any sign of her target. The ship's intelligence files had provided detailed layouts of Krillian command vessels, including the location of the primary bridge and the War Master's likely position during combat operations. I see movement on their main bridge, she reported. Large figure near the center of the compartment. Could be our target. The determination shuddered slightly as the enemy escorts began to close on their position. Webb's voice carried new urgency as he coordinated evasive maneuvers with his helmsman. They had minutes at most before the hegemony fleet would bring its full firepower to bear. Through her scope, Zara watched as the figure on the enemy bridge moved to what appeared to be a central command position. The range was extreme, the target was moving, and she would have exactly one chance to make the shot count. Target acquired, she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Range 15.2 kilometers, wind 0, target moving left to right at approximately 0.3 meters per second. The mathematical calculations ran through her mind with practiced ease. Bullet drop over this distance would be minimal in vacuum, but she had to lead the target to account for movement. The enemy ship's rotation would carry Krex through her sight picture in a predictable arc. Chun. Webb's voice was tight with stress. Enemy escorts are closing fast. We got maybe 30 seconds before they're in weapons range. Zara's breathing slowed as she entered the familiar zone of absolute focus that separated expert marksmen from merely good ones. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, the gentle pressure of the trigger under her finger, and the target moving slowly across her field of view. The figure on the enemy bridge paused, turning to face something outside her view. For a moment, War Master Krex stood perfectly still, presenting a clear profile against the backdrop of his command center. Taking the shot, Zara whispered. Her fingers squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar authority, sending a single brass-jacketed bullet spinning through the vacuum at 800 meters per second. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she tracked the invisible projectile's path towards target. 15 kilometers of empty space that the bullet would cross in 18.7 seconds, following a trajectory calculated with the precision of mathematics and the intuition of experience. On the bridge of the determination, every eye was fixed on the tactical display showing the massive enemy fleet bearing down on them. Webb counted the seconds in his head, knowing that their entire mission depended on a single shot fired by a weapon that galactic civilization had abandoned centuries ago. Through her scope, Zara watched the bridge of the enemy flagship with unblinking intensity. She could see crew members moving about their duties, displays flickering with tactical information, and the imposing figure of War Master Krex as he gestured towards something outside her field of view. 18 seconds after she pulled the trigger, the .308 caliber bullet struck the forward viewport of the Inevitable Victory's main bridge at full velocity. The transparent aluminum that formed the viewport was designed to withstand the stress of space travel and the impact of small debris. It was not designed to stop a precisely aimed projectile traveling at supersonic speed. The bullet punched through the viewport like a needle through paper, maintaining enough velocity to cross the bridge compartment and strike War Master Krex's center mass. The Krillian commander's expression shifted from arrogant confidence to shock, then to nothing at all as he collapsed to the deck of his flagship. Emergency alarms began wailing throughout the enemy fleet as the bridge of the Inevitable Victory explosive decompressed through the bullet hole in its viewport. Crew members scrambled for emergency suits while automated systems sealed blast doors and activated backup life support. Direct hit, Zara announced calmly, working the bolt of her rifle to chamber another round. Target is down. The effect on the enemy fleet was immediate and dramatic. The precisely coordinated attack formation began to wobble as individual ship commanders lost contact with their supreme leader. Some vessels continued their attack runs on pure momentum, while others hesitated, waiting for new orders that would never come. All ships, Webb broadcast on the emergency frequency. This is Captain Webb of the Terran vessel Determination. War Master Krex is dead. I am prepared to discuss terms for your immediate withdrawal from this system. The response was chaos. Some hegemony vessels opened fire on anything that moved, their commanders either disbelieving the news or determined to continue the fight regardless. Others began falling back, their captains unwilling to continue an operation that had lost its strategic leadership. But it was the reaction aboard the inevitable victory that truly mattered. With their War Master dead and their bridge compromised, the massive flagship began to drift as its command structure collapsed into confusion and infighting. Zara kept her scope trained on the enemy vessel, watching for any sign of organized resistance. Through the damaged viewport, she could see crew members in emergency suits trying to restore order to their bridge. Without Krex's dominating presence, they seemed lost, unsure of how to proceed. "Chunta bridge," she reported. "I count at least 6 secondary targets on their command deck. Shall I engage?" Webb's voice carried relief and amazement in equal measure. "Negative. Hold position and observe. I think we've made our point." As word of War Master Krex's death spread through the hegemony fleet, the coordinated attack began to fall apart completely. Ship commanders who had been selected more for their loyalty than their tactical brilliance found themselves facing a situation they had never trained for, fighting without the absolute authority figure who made all their decisions. The revolution that Zara's single shot had started was just beginning. The hegemony fleet hung in space like a pack of predators that had suddenly lost their alpha. Without War Master Krex's commanding presence to coordinate their actions, individual ship captains began making independent decisions that revealed the fragile nature of Krillian military doctrine. Some vessels maintained their attack formations out of pure training, while others began to withdraw toward the edge of the system, their commanders unwilling to continue without clear orders from above. Aboard the Determination, Captain Webb watched the tactical display with growing amazement. What had begun as a desperate gambit with minimal chances of success was evolving into something unprecedented in modern galactic warfare. A single precisely placed shot had accomplished what entire fleets had failed to achieve against hegemony forces. Captain Lieutenant Kim's voice carried excitement barely contained by military protocol. "We're receiving multiple communications from the enemy fleet. Some are demanding to know the status of their War Master, others are requesting permission to withdraw, and at least 3 vessels appear to be arguing with each other over tactical command authority." Webb nodded grimly. The chaos spreading through the hegemony formation was exactly what he had hoped for, but he knew their advantage would be temporary. Someone among the enemy fleet would eventually assert command authority and reorganize the scattered forces. Communications, open a channel to the inevitable victory. Let's see if anyone over there is ready to be reasonable. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the devastated bridge of the enemy flagship. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the compartment, where Krillian crew members in emergency suits moved among debris and damaged equipment. The massive form of War Master Krex lay motionless near the center of the bridge, surrounded by the chaos his death had created. A Krillian officer approached the communication pickup, his movements suggesting deep uncertainty. When he spoke, his voice lacked the absolute confidence that had characterized Krex's communications. "Human vessel," the officer said carefully. "I am Subcommander Vrak of the Inevitable Victory. I demand to know how you accomplished this attack. Our shields showed no energy weapon discharge, no projectile launch signature, nothing that would indicate an incoming threat." Webb stepped into view of the pickup, his expression serious but not hostile. "Subcommander, I am Captain Webb. What you witnessed was the result of technology so primitive that your detection systems were not programmed to recognize it as a weapon. A single chemical-propelled projectile fired by one of my officers." Vrak's confusion was evident even through the environmental suit's faceplate. "Chemical propulsion? You mean the obsolete ballistic weapons your species used before achieving energy manipulation technology? That is impossible. Such primitive devices cannot penetrate modern defensive systems. And yet, Webb gestured toward the devastated bridge around Vrak. Your War Master is dead, killed by a single bullet from a rifle that's over a century old by Earth standards. Your shields can stop energy weapons, particle beams, and plasma discharges, but they were never designed to intercept physical projectiles traveling at subsonic speeds. The implications of Webb's words seemed to hit Vrak like a physical blow. The entire foundation of modern military doctrine assumed that physical projectile weapons were obsolete, replaced by far more efficient energy-based systems. The idea that such primitive technology could pose a threat to advanced starships was a paradigm shift that challenged everything Krillian military philosophy represented. This changes nothing, Vrak said, but his voice carried none of Krex's earlier certainty. The hegemony fleet still outnumbers your single vessel by more than 30 to 1. We can destroy you with concentrated fire. Webb smiled coldly. You can try, Subcommander. But consider this. My marksman is still in position with additional ammunition. Your fleet command structure is in chaos. Your coordination is breaking down, and every ship captain in your formation is now wondering if they might be the next target. On her improvised sniper's nest, Zara Chun maintained her position with the patience of a professional hunter. Through her scope, she could see the ongoing chaos aboard the enemy flagship's bridge as crew members tried to restore some semblance of order. Her rifle remained loaded and ready, the crosshairs steady on the transparent aluminum that had proven so inadequate against primitive human technology. Chun to bridge, she reported quietly. I have clear shots on multiple targets aboard the flagship. Their emergency repairs haven't restored the viewport integrity, and I count at least 8 officers in what appear to be command positions. Webb considered the tactical situation carefully. They had achieved the impossible by killing War Master Krex, but their position remained precarious. The determination was still vastly outnumbered, and it would only take one competent enemy commander to reorganize the scattered fleet into an effective fighting force. Hold position, Commander, he ordered. Let's see what Subcommander Vrak decides to do. The answer came sooner than expected. On the tactical display, 3 of the hegemony heavy cruisers began moving toward the determination, their weapons charging for coordinated attack. It appeared that some Krillian commanders had decided that honor demanded revenge for their fallen leader, regardless of the tactical situation. Incoming hostiles, announced the tactical officer. 3 heavy cruisers on attack vector, weapons hot. Time to weapons range, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Zara adjusted her scope's targeting solution, seeking the optimal shot among the multiple targets now available on the enemy flagship's bridge. Subcommander Vrak had positioned himself near what appeared to be the primary command console, well within her effective range. Captain, she said in her comm unit, recommend I engage the subcommander before those cruisers get into weapons range. Remove their coordination completely. Webb hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences of escalating their attack. Killing Krex could be explained as a surgical strike against a military leader. Continuing to target enemy officers would constitute something closer to systematic assassination. The decision was made for him when a lead hegemony cruiser opened fire with long-range plasma cannons. Brilliant energy beams reached across space toward the determination, forcing Webb's helmsman into violent evasive maneuvers. Chun, you are clear to engage, Webb ordered. Take out anyone who looks like they're trying to organize resistance. Zara's second shot took Subcommander Vrak in the center of mass as he leaned over a tactical display, probably trying to coordinate the attack on their position. The .308 bullet punched through his emergency suit with the same devastating effectiveness it had shown against the viewport, dropping him to the deck beside his former commander. The effect on the attacking cruisers was immediate. Without coordination from the flagship, their formation began to spread out as individual captains attempted to pursue independent attack runs. The precise timing that made concentrated fleet actions so devastating was lost as each ship commander tried to anticipate what their companions were doing. Third target, Zara announced, tracking another Krillian officer who had approached the command console. Range holding steady, no wind factors. Her third shot eliminated what appeared to be the fleet's senior tactical officer, a Krillian who had been gesturing at the tactical display in what looked like an attempt to restore order to the bridge. With his death, the command structure aboard the inevitable Victory collapsed completely. The attacking cruisers, now deprived of any coordination from their flagship, began firing independently at the nimble human vessel. Their plasma cannons lit up space with deadly energy, but the Determination's superior maneuverability and smaller size made it a difficult target. Webb's helmsman wove through the incoming fire with skill that would have impressed Academy instructors. "Captain," Lieutenant Kim reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from at least 6 escort vessels. Their commanders are requesting permission to withdraw from the engagement area." On the tactical display, the hegemony formation was disintegrating rapidly. Some vessels continued to fight, driven by loyalty to their dead war master or simple military pride. Others began to retreat toward the edge of the system, their commanders apparently deciding that discretion was preferable to facing an enemy who could kill their leadership with impunity. But it was the reaction aboard other ships in the fleet that truly demonstrated the psychological impact of Zara's marksmanship. Krillian naval doctrine emphasized the absolute authority of command hierarchy, with junior officers trained to follow orders without question. The systematic elimination of senior leadership created a vacuum that most subordinates were simply not prepared to fill. "Chun to bridge," Zara reported, chambering her fourth round with mechanical precision. "I'm tracking movement on the bridge of the lead attack cruiser. Looks like their captain is trying to coordinate with the other attacking vessels." Webb studied the tactical display, watching as the 3 attacking cruisers attempted to form a coordinated attack pattern despite the loss of fleet command. The lead ship's captain was clearly an experienced officer, probably someone senior enough to take initiative when the command structure collapsed. "Range to target?" Webb asked. 22.6 kilometers, and "closing," Zara replied. "Longer shot than the flagship, but still within effective range." Their bridge appears to have standard transparency rather than the reinforced viewports on the flagship. The mathematics of a shot were more complex now, with the target vessel moving at high speed relative to the Determination. Zara would have to account for the velocity of both ships, the acceleration of the target as it maneuvered, and the increased bullet flight time over the greater distance. "Take the shot when ready," Webb ordered. Zara's breathing slowed as she calculated the lead necessary to hit a target moving at combat speed. Through her scope, she could see the Krillian captain gesturing at his tactical officers, apparently coordinating the final attack run that would bring all 3 cruisers into optimal firing position. The shot was a masterpiece of ballistic calculation. The bullet crossed over 20 kilometers of space in 27 seconds, striking the bridge of the lead cruiser just as its captain leaned forward to examine a tactical display. The result was immediate chaos as the attacking vessel lost coordination and began to drift off course. "Direct hit on Cruiser 1, Zara announced. "Target is down. Ship appears to be falling out of formation." The psychological effect of the 4th successful shot rippled through the entire hegemony fleet like a shock wave. The idea that human marksmen could reach across space to eliminate individual targets with primitive weapons was so far outside Krillian military experience that many commanders simply could not process it. On the bridge of the 2nd attacking cruiser, Captain Thex stared at the tactical display in growing horror. He watched as the lead ship drifted helplessly, its bridge compromised, and its captain dead from an impossible shot fired by an obsolete weapon. Around him, his own officers looked to him for orders that he was increasingly reluctant to give. "Sir," his tactical officer spoke carefully, "should we continue the attack run?" Thex studied the human vessel on his display, trying to understand how a single ship could systematically eliminate the command structure of an entire fleet. Everything he had learned about warfare suggested that such precision targeting was impossible at these ranges, especially using primitive ballistic weapons. "Communications," he ordered finally, open a channel to the human ship. When Captain Webb appeared on the screen, Thex found himself facing an enemy who looked far less primitive than hegemony intelligence had suggested. The human's eyes carried the confidence of someone who held all the tactical advantages. Captain Webb, Thex said formally, I am Captain Thex of the hegemony cruiser Relentless Pursuit. I wish to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities. Webb nodded respectfully. Captain Thex, I am prepared to discuss your immediate withdrawal from this system. I believe the tactical situation has become clear to all parties involved. Through her scope, Zara continued to track targets of opportunity throughout the enemy fleet, her rifle loaded and ready for whatever developments might require her intervention. The revolution that had begun with a single shot was spreading throughout the Krillian formation, but she remained focused on the possibility that someone might still try to salvage the situation through force. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most advanced technology could be defeated by the oldest solutions. The news of the hegemony fleet's collapse spread through galactic communication networks with the speed of hyperspace transmissions. Within hours, every major power in the galaxy knew that a single human vessel had achieved what entire battle groups had failed to accomplish: the complete neutralization of Krillian naval supremacy through tactics so primitive that they seemed like something from ancient history. On the bridge of the Determination, Captain Webb found himself fielding communications from across known space. The Centauri Collective, which had dismissed their mission as futile, now wanted detailed tactical reports. The Andromedan Trade Union had withdrawn their offer of funeral services and replaced it with requests for military consultations. Even a normally aloof Etherian hierarchy was asking questions about human combat doctrine. Captain Lieutenant Kim announced, We're receiving priority communications from the Galactic Council chambers on Alpha Centauri. Fleet Admiral Saren wishes to speak with you personally. Webb straightened his uniform and nodded toward the main view screen. Admiral Saren was a Voltorian, one of the founding species of the Galactic Council, and his opinion carried enormous weight in determining galactic military policy. The screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Admiral Saren. His crystalline features reflected the lighting of the council chambers, and his four arms moved in gestures that conveyed both surprise and respect. Behind him, Webb could see other council members gathered in apparent emergency session. Captain Webb, Saren's voice carried the harmonic undertones characteristic of his species. The Council has been monitoring your engagement with the hegemony fleet. We must admit to considerable surprise at the outcome. Our tactical analysts are requesting detailed information about the weapons and methods you employed. Webb glanced toward the observation deck where Zara Chun maintained her overwatch position. Admiral, we used a combination of traditional Earth ballistic weaponry and precision marksmanship techniques. The enemy's defensive systems were not configured to stop physical projectiles, creating a vulnerability that we were able to exploit. Physical projectiles, Saren repeated, his tone suggesting he was still processing the implications. You mean the primitive chemical propulsion weapons that predate energy manipulation technology? Captain, our military experts have been studying your engagement, and they're finding it difficult to believe that such obsolete systems could prove effective against modern naval vessels. The skepticism in Saren's voice was understandable. For over 1,000 years, galactic military doctrine had assumed that energy weapons represented the pinnacle of combat effectiveness. The idea that ancient projectile technology could outperform modern systems challenged fundamental assumptions about military evolution. Admiral, Webb replied carefully, sometimes the oldest solutions are the most effective. Human military history includes numerous examples of primitive weapons achieving decisive results against more advanced opponents. We simply applied those lessons to a modern context. On the observation deck, Zara Chun continued her vigil over the scattered hegemony fleet. Through her scope, she could see the ongoing confusion aboard various enemy vessels as their command structures struggled to adapt to the loss of central authority. Several ships had already begun withdrawing toward the edge of the system, their captains apparently deciding that continued resistance was pointless. But it was the reaction aboard the remaining vessels that truly illustrated the psychological impact of their attack. Krillian military culture emphasized hierarchy and absolute obedience to superior officers. With their command structure systematically eliminated, many ships found themselves paralyzed by indecision. "Chun to bridge," she reported. "I'm observing significant activity aboard the heavy cruiser Inexorable Will. Looks like someone's trying to assert command authority and rally the remaining ships." Webb studied the tactical display, where the cruiser in question was indeed beginning to signal other vessels in what appeared to be an attempt to restore fleet coordination. If successful, the Krillians might still be able to mount an organized resistance despite their losses. "Admiral Saren," Webb said, turning back to the communication screen. "If you'll excuse me, we still have tactical considerations to address. The enemy fleet has not yet formally surrendered, and some elements appear to be reorganizing." Saren's crystalline features shifted in what might have been approval. "Of course, Captain. The Council will await your full report. However, I should inform you that we are already receiving communications from other powers requesting information about your tactical innovations. The hegemony's reputation for invincibility has been significantly damaged." As the communication ended, Webb considered the broader implications of their success. The Krillian hegemony had built their expansion on the assumption that their military technology was superior to anything other species could field. By demonstrating that primitive human weapons could neutralize their advantages, the determination had potentially altered the entire balance of galactic power. "Captain," his tactical officer announced, "the Inexorable Will is broadcasting to the remaining fleet elements. They're attempting to coordinate a withdrawal to defensive positions around the outer planets." Through her scope, Zara could see the bridge of the Inexorable Will, where a Krillian officer was gesturing emphatically at what appeared to be a fleet coordination display. If this commander succeeded in organizing an orderly retreat, the hegemony might be able to salvage something from the disaster and potentially return with reinforcements. "Range to the Inexorable Will?" Webb asked. 31.4 kilometers, Zara replied. "Long shot, but manageable. Their bridge appears to have standard viewport configuration, and the target is relatively stationary while coordinating with other vessels." Webb weighed the decision carefully. Another successful shot would effectively end any possibility of hegemony reorganization, but it would also demonstrate that human marksmen could reach across incredible distances to eliminate specific targets. The psychological impact on enemy morale would be devastating. "Chun, you are cleared to engage. Let's make sure they understand that resistance is futile." Zara's fifth shot was her most challenging yet. The increased range meant longer bullet flight time, requiring her to anticipate the target's movement over 35 seconds of travel time. She had to account for the orbital mechanics of the battle area, the acceleration of both vessels, and the slight gravitational influence of the system's primary star. The .308 bullet crossed 31 kilometers of vacuum with mathematical precision, striking the bridge of the Inexorable Will just as its captain reached for communication control. The shot eliminated the last serious attempt at hegemony reorganization, leaving the scattered fleet elements without any coordinated leadership. "Target eliminated," Zara announced. "Enemy fleet coordination appears to be completely broken." The reaction was immediate and decisive. Across the hegemony formation, individual ship captains began broadcasting surrender signals or requests for safe passage out of the system. Without any central authority to coordinate resistance, the massive fleet that had threatened to dominate the sector dissolved into a collection of demoralized vessels seeking escape. Captain Thex of the Relentless Pursuit was among the first to formally surrender, transmitting a message that would be remembered in military academies for generations to come. "Human vessel determination." His voice carried resignation and something approaching respect. "I formally surrender my ship and request safe passage for my crew." Your marksman has demonstrated capabilities that our doctrine never anticipated. Further resistance would serve no purpose except to waste the lives of my officers. Similar messages began flooding the communication channels as other hegemony commanders reached the same conclusion. Within an hour of War Master Krex's death, the entire fleet was either surrendering or fleeing the system in disorder. But the strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Word of the engagement was already spreading through hyperspace communication networks, reaching every corner of galactic civilization. The story grew with each retelling. A single human ship had defeated an entire hegemony fleet using weapons so primitive that they predated space travel. On the bridge of the Etherian hierarchy vessel, Transcendent Dawn, Admiral Kelleth studied intelligence reports from the Vega system with growing amazement. The Etherians prided themselves on technological advancement, considering their energy manipulation capabilities the pinnacle of military science. Advisor Mint, Kelleth addressed his chief tactical analyst, explained to me how chemical propulsion projectiles could penetrate modern defensive systems. Mint's response carried the uncertainty of someone whose fundamental assumptions about warfare had just been proven wrong. Admiral, it appears that our shield technology was designed to counter energy-based weapons. Physical projectiles traveling at subsonic speeds simply pass through energy barriers as if they don't exist. The implications hit Kelleth like a physical blow. Every ship in the Etherian fleet, every defensive installation in their territory, every military doctrine they had developed was suddenly vulnerable to weapons that galactic civilization had abandoned centuries ago. Similar realizations were occurring in command centers throughout known space. The Andromedan Trade Union's military advisors were hastily reviewing their defensive capabilities. The Centauri Collective was demanding emergency sessions to discuss the tactical ramifications. Even the powerful Nexus Empire was quietly beginning research into projectile weapon defenses. Back in the Vega system, Captain Webb was fielding communication requests from across the galaxy. Military attaches, intelligence analysts, and diplomatic representatives all wanted to understand how humanity had achieved the impossible. Captain Lieutenant Kim announced, "We're receiving a priority message from Earth Command. Fleet Admiral Chun wants a full tactical briefing as soon as possible." Webb nodded, unsurprised that news of their success had reached Earth so quickly. Admiral Chun was Zara's aunt and had been instrumental in developing the tactics that made their mission possible. But it was the private communication that arrived next that truly illustrated the scope of their achievement. The message came from an encrypted hegemony channel, originating from the homeworld of the Krillian Empire itself. Captain Webb, the voice belonged to someone who clearly held high authority in Krillian society. "I am War Master Drak of the Imperial Fleet. I speak for the High Command in offering formal negotiations for the cessation of hostilities in the Vega system." The transformation was complete. In less than 6 hours, the Krillian hegemony had gone from confident aggression to desperate diplomacy, all because of 5 perfectly placed shots from a century-old rifle. As Zarachan finally stood down from her sniper position, she reflected on the strange turns that military innovation could take. The galaxy had spent centuries perfecting energy weapons and defensive systems, creating an arms race that emphasized bigger guns and stronger shields. But they had forgotten that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. A chunk of lead traveling at 800 meters per second had proven more decisive than all the plasma cannons and particle beams in the hegemony arsenal. The revolution was complete, but its effects were just beginning to spread throughout galactic civilization. 3 months after the Battle of Vega, the galactic political landscape had transformed beyond recognition. The Krillian hegemony, once the most feared military power in known space, found itself diplomatically isolated and militarily neutered. Their expansion had ground to a halt as potential targets began implementing primitive weapon defenses that rendered traditional hegemony tactics obsolete. Commander Zurachan stood before the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council, her dress uniform crisp and her bearing confident as she prepared to address representatives from over 40 species. The Grand Chamber on Alpha Centauri hummed with translation devices and whispered conversations as beings who had never given humanity serious consideration now hung on her every word. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "The events at Vega have demonstrated something that galactic civilization had forgotten. Military superiority is not always about having the most advanced technology. Sometimes it's about understanding the fundamental principles that make any weapon effective." Admiral Saren of the Voltorians leaned forward in his crystalline chair, his four arms moving in gestures of respectful attention. "Commander Chun, our military analysts have been studying your engagement extensively. They report that the psychological impact of your attack was as significant as the tactical results. Can you explain this phenomenon?" Zura nodded thoughtfully. "Admiral, military effectiveness often depends as much on the enemy's expectations as on actual capabilities. The hegemony's entire strategic doctrine was built on the assumption that energy weapons represented the pinnacle of military technology. When that assumption proved false, their confidence collapsed along with their command structure. The delegation from the Andromedan Trade Union shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their representative, a tall, thin being known as Trade Factor Elms, spoke with barely concealed anxiety. "Commander, our intelligence services indicate that at least 12 species have begun manufacturing primitive projectile weapons based on your example. The implications for galactic security are concerning." The concern was justified. In the months since Vega, the galactic arms market had been turned upside down. Species that had spent centuries perfecting energy weapons were suddenly scrambling to develop defenses against technology their ancestors had abandoned. Research facilities throughout known space were working frantically to create shield systems capable of stopping physical projectiles. "Trade Factor Elms," Zara replied diplomatically. "The technology itself is not inherently destabilizing. What matters is how it's employed and by whom. Earth has no intention of using these capabilities for aggressive expansion. We developed this approach specifically to counter hegemony aggression in defense of established territorial boundaries." From the back of the chamber, a rumbling voice interrupted the discussion. War Master Drak of the Krillian delegation stood slowly, his massive form casting shadows across nearby seats. The former enemy commander had arrived on Alpha Centauri as part of peace negotiations that would have been unthinkable before Vega. "Commander Chun," Drak's voice carried a mixture of respect and residual hostility. "You speak of defensive applications, but the reality is that your tactics have rendered our entire military doctrine obsolete. How does the hegemony adapt to threats that our technology cannot counter?" Zara met his gaze steadily, showing none of the intimidation that Krillian commanders expected to inspire. "War Master Drak, adaptation is a choice that every military force must make when confronted with new realities. The question is whether the hegemony chooses to learn from Vega or to repeat the mistakes that led to your defeat." The exchange highlighted the central challenge facing galactic civilization in the post-Vega era. Traditional military hierarchies were struggling to adapt to a reality where technological superiority no longer guaranteed tactical advantage. The careful balance of power that had maintained relative stability for centuries was dissolving as species reassessed their capabilities and vulnerabilities. Captain Webb, attending the session as an observer, watched the interplay between delegates with growing appreciation for the complexity of the situation they had created. Their tactical victory at Vega had achieved far more than simply stopping hegemony expansion. It had fundamentally altered the strategic calculations that guided galactic politics. During a recess in the formal proceedings, Webb found himself approached by Admiral Keleth of the Etherian hierarchy. The advanced species had maintained neutrality in most galactic conflicts, preferring to observe and analyze rather than engage directly. "Captain Webb," Keleth's voice carried harmonic undertones that suggested deep thought. "My tactical advisors have been modeling scenarios based on your Vega engagement. They report some disturbing conclusions about the stability of current defensive doctrines. Webb nodded understanding. Admiral, any military innovation has the potential to disrupt established patterns. The question is whether that disruption leads to greater stability or increased conflict. Keleth's crystalline features shifted in what might have been concern. Our models suggest that projectile weapons could neutralize many of the defensive advantages that have prevented large-scale warfare for the past several centuries. If multiple species begin employing these tactics simultaneously, the Admiral's concern reflected discussions occurring throughout galactic military establishments. The Etherian hierarchy's advanced computer systems had run thousands of combat simulations, and the results consistently showed that primitive weapons could potentially negate the defensive advantages that had made large-scale warfare prohibitively expensive. But it was the human response to these concerns that surprised many observers. Rather than capitalizing on their tactical breakthrough for aggressive expansion, Earth had begun offering training and consultation services to species seeking to develop projectile weapon defenses. Admiral Keleth, Webb continued, humanity learned centuries ago that military advantages are temporary. The real security comes from establishing systems that promote stability rather than dominance. We're willing to share our knowledge precisely because widespread understanding of these tactics will ultimately reduce their effectiveness as tools of aggression. The approach was unprecedented in galactic military history. Previous species that had achieved decisive tactical advantages had typically exploited them for territorial or political gain. Earth's willingness to share their innovations suggested a fundamentally different approach to interspecies relations. Ambassador Sarah Kim, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, had spent the past months negotiating agreements that would formalize this approach. The Terra Accords, as they were becoming known, would establish protocols for sharing defensive technologies while preventing their use for aggressive expansion. Honored delegates, Ambassador Kim announced as the session reconvened, Earth formally proposes the establishment of a Galactic Defense Research Initiative. This organization would coordinate the development of defensive systems capable of countering all forms of military technology, including primitive projectile weapons. The proposal generated immediate debate. Some species supported the initiative as a way to restore military balance, while others worried about creating an organization with access to advanced defensive technologies from multiple civilizations. War Master Drock stood again, his massive presence commanding attention throughout the chamber. Ambassador Kim, the hegemony is prepared to contribute our shield technology and tactical databases to such an initiative. We have learned that military dominance built on technological superiority is ultimately fragile. The offer surprised many observers, representing a complete reversal of traditional hegemony policy. For a species that had built their empire on military intimidation, volunteering to share advanced defensive technology suggested a fundamental reevaluation of their strategic approach. Zara Chen listened to the debates with mixed feelings. The tactical breakthrough that had saved Vega was evolving into something far more complex than a simple military victory. The primitive rifle that had killed War Master Krex was becoming a symbol of humanity's approach to galactic relations, effective when necessary, but ultimately aimed at creating systems that made such effectiveness unnecessary. Over the following days, the Terra Accords took shape through careful negotiation and compromise. The final agreement established protocols for defensive research sharing, limitations on aggressive applications of primitive weapons, and mechanisms for monitoring compliance across member species. But it was the personal transformation of key participants that truly illustrated the broader changes occurring throughout galactic civilization. War Master Drock, once the embodiment of hegemony aggression, found himself working closely with human military advisors to develop new tactical doctrines that emphasized defense over conquest. Commander Chun, Drock approached her during a break in negotiations. I have studied the records of your shot extensively. The precision required was extraordinary, but it was the decision to take that shot that interests me most. You could have simply demonstrated your capability without killing our leadership. Zara considered her response carefully. War Master, sometimes demonstration is insufficient to change deeply held beliefs. Your species respected strength above all else. To communicate effectively with the hegemony, we had to speak in terms you would understand. Drock's expression shifted in what might have been the beginning of understanding. You mean that killing War Master Krex was not about eliminating him specifically, but about proving the human military capabilities were not what they appear to be? Exactly, Zara confirmed. The goal was never to start a war with the hegemony. It was to prevent one by demonstrating that such a war would not proceed as you expected. The insight highlighted something that many species were beginning to understand about human military philosophy. Earth's approach to conflict emphasized achieving strategic objectives with minimal necessary force. But that minimum could be devastatingly effective when properly applied. As the Terra Accords moved toward final approval, reports began arriving from across the galaxy, documenting their effects. The Nexus Empire had quietly abandoned plans for expansion into contested territories. The Andromedan Trade Union was investing heavily in defensive research rather than offensive capabilities. Even minor powers that had never considered themselves military threats were re-evaluating their security arrangements. Captain Webb found himself assigned to lead the new Galactic Defense Research Initiative, with Zara Chun as his chief tactical advisor. Their first assignment would be developing standardized defensive protocols that could protect against primitive weapons while maintaining the delicate balance of galactic politics. But perhaps the most significant change was occurring within human space itself. The success at Vega had demonstrated that Earth's position in galactic civilization was not as weak as many had assumed. Humanity's unique perspective on warfare and diplomacy was beginning to be recognized as a valuable contribution to galactic stability. "Captain," Zara said as they prepared to leave Alpha Centauri for their new assignment, "do you think we've actually made things better? Or just different?" Webb considered the question as he watched alien diplomats and military officers working together on problems that had seemed impossible before Vega. "Maybe that's the same thing," he replied. "Sometimes the best you can do is change the nature of the challenges everyone faces." As their transport departed the council chambers, Zara reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. A single shot from a primitive rifle had demonstrated that technological advancement was not the only path to military effectiveness. Sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones, but only if you were brave enough to use them when everything else had failed. The galaxy had learned to take humanity seriously, but more importantly, humanity had learned that their unique perspective on problem-solving was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be shared. In a universe full of species pursuing bigger weapons and stronger shields, sometimes the most revolutionary approach was to step backward and remember what had worked before. The revolution that began with "Wrong Gun, Sweetheart" had ended with something far more valuable than military victory. The recognition that diversity of thought and approach was galactic civilization's greatest defense against the unknown challenges that lay ahead. Behind them, the lights of Alpha Centauri faded into the star field, but ahead lay the work of building a more stable galaxy, one defensive innovation at a time. The primitive rifle that had changed everything was now safely stored in Earth's military museum, but its lesson would echo through the halls of galactic power for generations to come. Sometimes the old ways were indeed the best ways, especially when everyone else had forgotten they existed.